I never thought a glass of red wine could change everything. But as I stood there in the Parkers' opulent dining room, burgundy liquid dripping down my white designer dress, I realized this was my moment of truth. Judith Parker's face was twisted with rage, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at me like a weapon. "You think you're somebody, don't you? Some uneducated country girl who dares to lecture me. Get out of here, you trash!" Her voice cut through the stunned silence that had fallen over the family dinner. Ethan shot up from his chair. "Mom," but Judith wasn't finished. She never was when it came to putting me in what she considered my place. "You've ruined this family. Get out." The venom in her voice made my blood run cold, but something inside me snapped. Not broke. Snapped into focus. I looked straight into her eyes, feeling a calmness I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm leaving. And Ethan, you need to choose." I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving chaos and Ethan's pale face behind me. But to understand how we got to that moment, I need to take you back 18 months earlier, to a time when I still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. It was December 15th, 2023, and snow was falling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Narrative Edge's Manhattan headquarters. I was standing in my corner office, looking out at the city that had become my kingdom, feeling like I owned the world. At 32, I had built something extraordinary from nothing. The marketing firm that started in my studio apartment 7 years ago now occupied 3 floors of a prime midtown building and employed over 200 people. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Evans, your 3 o'clock is here. Send them in, sir." The door opened to reveal James Morrison, CEO of Pinnacle Technologies, followed by his entire executive team. This was the meeting I'd been preparing for all year. Pinnacle was the white whale of tech clients, a company so exclusive they'd never worked with an outside marketing firm before. Landing them would legitimize Narrative Edge as a major player in the industry. "Gentlemen, welcome," I said, gesturing to the conference table where my presentation materials were already arranged with military precision. The next 2 hours were a master class in persuasion. I walked them through our comprehensive strategy for launching their new artificial intelligence platform, complete with demographic analysis, market penetration models, and a media campaign that would position Pinnacle as the leader in ethical AI development. James Morrison leaned back in his chair when I finished, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Evans, this is exactly what we've been looking for. When can you start?" 3 weeks later, I was celebrating with Ethan at La Bernardine. The Pinnacle contract was worth $52 million over 3 years, the largest deal in Narrative Edge's history. The champagne was Dom Perignon, the caviar was Austria, and my husband was looking at me like I'd just moved mountains. "You're incredible, Harper," Ethan said, raising his crystal flute. "From selling handmade bracelets at college fairs to becoming the queen of marketing. I'm so proud of you." I smiled, feeling the intoxicating mixture of success and love. "We did this together, honey. Your support means everything to me." Ethan's support had been unwavering from the beginning. We'd met at a charity gala 4 years earlier, one of those stuffy Upper East Side affairs where old money mingled with new money and everyone pretended to care about whatever cause was being celebrated that evening. I was there as the guest of a client, feeling completely out of place in my department store dress among women wearing couture gowns that cost more than my car. Ethan found me hiding on the terrace, having escaped the suffocating small talk about summer houses in the Hamptons and winter trips to Aspen. "Not enjoying the party?" he'd asked, joining me at the railing overlooking Central Park. "Is it that obvious?" He laughed, and I noticed how it transformed his entire face. Ethan Parker was classically handsome in that effortless way that only came from good genes and better breeding. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and green eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. "I'm Ethan," he said, extending his hand. "Harper. And before you ask, yes, like the author. Actually, I was going to ask if you wanted to get out of here and grab some real food. I know a place that serves the best burgers in the city." That was the beginning of everything. Ethan was different from what I'd expected from someone with his background. He didn't name drop or talk about his family's money. He asked about my business, my dreams, my childhood in Ohio. He seemed genuinely interested in my stories about working 3 jobs to pay for college and starting Narrative Edge with $5,000 and a borrowed laptop. Our courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. Ethan introduced me to his world gradually, taking me to gallery openings and charity events, teaching me which fork to use at formal dinners and how to make small talk with people whose yearly clothing budget exceeded my annual salary. But he also embraced my world, spending weekends at dive bars in Brooklyn and eating takeout Chinese food on my apartment floor while I worked on client presentations. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, it was perfect. A private dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first real date, a ring that was elegant without being ostentatious, and a speech about how I'd made him believe in love again. The wedding was small by Parker family standards, only 300 guests at the Plaza Hotel. I wore my grandmother's pearls and a Vera Wang dress that Ethan insisted on buying despite my protests about the price. My parents flew in from Ohio, looking slightly overwhelmed but proud as they mingled with New York society elite. The only dark cloud on that perfect day was Judith Parker. From the moment Ethan first brought me home to meet his family, I knew his mother disapproved of me. It wasn't anything she said directly, at least not at first. It was in the way her smile never reached her eyes when she looked at me, the way she introduced me to her friends as Ethan's little girlfriend from Ohio, the way she always managed to find reasons why I couldn't join family traditions or vacations. Judith Parker was a formidable woman in her early 60s, the kind of person who had never worked a day in her life but somehow managed to run half of Manhattan's charitable organizations. She was elegant, poised, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting what she considered hers. And Ethan was hers, her firstborn son, her pride and joy, her masterpiece. I represented everything she feared to change: outsiders, the erosion of the carefully constructed world she'd spent decades building. But I was determined to win her over. I studied her the way I studied potential clients, learning her preferences, her passions, her pressure points. I discovered she was passionate about literacy programs, so I arranged for Narrative Edge to sponsor a reading initiative at inner-city schools. I learned she loved orchids, so I sent rare varieties to her greenhouse with thoughtful notes. I researched her friends and their interests, preparing conversation topics that would impress them at dinner parties. None of it worked. If anything, my efforts seemed to make Judith more suspicious of me. She began making subtle comments about my ambition and how it might not be compatible with being a proper wife. She questioned whether someone with my background could truly understand the responsibilities that came with being part of the Parker family. "Ethan needs someone who can support him properly," she said to me one evening when we were alone in her sitting room. "Someone who understands that family comes first, always." "I do understand that, Mrs. Parker, I love Ethan more than anything. Love isn't enough, dear. Ethan has obligations, expectations. He needs a partner who can help him fulfill them, not someone who's constantly pulling him in different directions. The message was clear. I was the wrong kind of woman for her son. But Ethan was oblivious to his mother's campaign against me, or perhaps he chose to be oblivious. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd dismiss my concerns with a wave of his hand. Mom's just protective, Harper. She'll come around once she gets to know you better. Ethan, we've been together for 3 years. How much better does she need to know me? Give her time. She's not used to change. So I gave her time. I endured the backhanded compliments, the pointed questions about my family, the not-so-subtle suggestions that I was holding Ethan back from his potential. I smiled and nodded and pretended not to notice when she seated me at the children's table during family gatherings or forgot to include me in family photos. After our wedding, things got worse instead of better. Judith seemed to view my marriage to her son as a personal defeat, and she wasn't the type of woman who accepted defeat gracefully. The first real warning sign came 6 months after the wedding. Ethan and I were having dinner at his parents' house, a weekly tradition that Judith insisted on maintaining. The conversation had turned to our plans for the future, specifically whether we intended to have children. I hope you're not planning to wait too long, Judith said, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. Ethan's not getting any younger, and I'd like to have grandchildren while I'm still young enough to enjoy them. We're not in any rush, I replied carefully. We want to enjoy being married for a while first. How modern of you, Judith said, her tone making it clear that modern was not a compliment. Of course, I suppose when one is focused on building an empire, family planning becomes secondary. Mom, Ethan warned, but Judith continued. I'm just saying that priorities matter. Some things are more important than quarterly earnings reports. That night, driving home to our apartment in Tribecar, I tried to talk to Ethan about his mother's increasing hostility. She's making it clear that she thinks I'm selfish for wanting to focus on my career right now. You're reading too much into it, Harper. She just wants grandchildren. All mothers do. She doesn't want grandchildren from me, Ethan. She wants grandchildren from someone else. Someone she actually approves of. That's not true. But it was true, and I was about to discover just how far Judith was willing to go to prove it. The campaign against me began in earnest after the Pinnacle contract was announced. Suddenly, my success wasn't something to be celebrated, it was something to be feared. Judith began making comments about women who prioritized their careers over their families, about the dangers of too much ambition, about how success could change a person in unpleasant ways. I knew a woman once who became very successful very quickly, she said during one family dinner, her eyes fixed on me. The money went to her head. She forgot who she really was, where she came from. It destroyed her marriage. That's an interesting story, Mrs. Parker, I replied evenly. What happened to her? She lost everything that really mattered. Career success is fleeting, Harper. Family is forever. But Judith wasn't content with psychological warfare. She was planning something much more destructive. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a phone call from Marcus Chen, my business partner and closest friend. Marcus and I had founded Narrative Edge together, and he handled the financial side of the business while I focused on client relations and strategy. Harper, we have a problem, he said, his voice tight with concern. I just got off the phone with Pinnacle. They're having second thoughts about the contract. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. What do you mean, second thoughts? James Morrison says they've received some concerning information about our company's stability. He wouldn't give me details, but he's asking for a meeting to discuss their concerns. Concerning information from whom? He wouldn't say. But Harper, someone's been feeding them negative information about us. About you specifically. The meeting with Pinnacle was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing responses to every possible concern they might raise, gathering financial statements, client testimonials, and performance metrics that proved Narrative Edge was not only stable but thriving. But when I walked into Pinnacle's conference room that Tuesday morning, I could tell something was seriously wrong. James Morrison's entire demeanor had changed. Where he'd been warm and collaborative before, he was now cold and professional. Ms. Evans, thank you for coming, he said without rising from his seat. I'll get straight to the point. We've received some information that raises questions about your company's ethical standards and your personal integrity. My blood ran cold. What kind of information? James slid a manila folder across the table. Photos of you in what appear to be intimate situations with various men who are not your husband. Communications suggesting that you use personal relationships to secure business deals. Financial records that raise questions about how you've achieved such rapid growth. I opened the folder with trembling hands, looking at photographs that had been clearly manipulated to suggest impropriety where none existed. The men in the photos were all clients or potential clients, and every meeting had been strictly professional. But the images had been cropped and edited to imply intimacy. Mr. Morrison, these photos are fake. They've been manipulated to create a false impression. Perhaps. But can you explain this? He handed me a printed email thread that appeared to show me discussing sexual favors in exchange for contracts. The email address was mine, but I had never sent these messages. This is fabricated. Someone has created fake emails using my name. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Evans. Who would go to such lengths to damage your reputation? I stared at the evidence of what could only be described as a professional assassination attempt. Someone had spent considerable time and money creating a comprehensive case against me, complete with forged documents and manipulated photos. I don't know, I lied, because I was beginning to suspect exactly who was behind this. Given these circumstances, Pinnacle has decided to terminate our contract. We can't risk associating our brand with these allegations, regardless of their validity. I left Pinnacle's offices feeling like I'd been physically assaulted. The loss of the contract was devastating enough, but the implications were worse. If these fabricated materials started circulating in the industry, they could destroy everything I'd worked to build. That evening, I sat in my office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at the Manhattan skyline and trying to figure out who hated me enough to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme. The answer came to me with sickening clarity. Only someone with significant resources could have produced such sophisticated forgeries. Only someone with access to detailed information about my business could have known which clients and meetings to target. Only someone with connections in New York's elite circles could have gotten these materials into the hands of Pinnacle's executives. Only Judith Parker. But I needed proof, and I knew exactly how to get it. The next morning, I called Ryan Mitchell, a private investigator who specialized in corporate espionage. Ryan was a former FBI agent with a reputation for discretion and results. His office was in a nondescript building in Midtown, the kind of place you'd walk past without noticing. "Ms. Evans," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. "I've heard about your situation. Ugly business. How much do you know?" "Enough to know that someone's playing hardball. The materials that surfaced at Pinnacle are sophisticated. We're talking about someone with serious resources and connections. I have a theory about who's behind this." "Let's hear it." I told him about Judith, about her escalating hostility, about the timeline of events. Ryan listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound notebook. "It's possible," he said when I finished. "But we need evidence. What you've told me is motive and opportunity, but that's not enough to prove anything." "What do you need?" "Communications. Financial records. Anything that shows a connection between your mother-in-law and whoever created these forgeries. It won't be easy. If she's as smart as you think she is, she'll have covered her tracks." "How long do you think it will take?" "Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on how careful she's been." We agreed on his fees and the scope of the investigation. As I left his office, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. If Ryan could prove that Judith was behind the attack on my business, it would vindicate me professionally. But it would also destroy my marriage. Over the next few weeks, the situation continued to deteriorate. Word of the Pinnacle contract cancellation spread through the industry, and other clients began asking pointed questions about our stability. 3 smaller clients canceled their contracts, citing budget concerns that I suspected were really reputation concerns. Meanwhile, Judith's behavior toward me became increasingly hostile. She no longer bothered with subtle insults or backhanded compliments. Her attacks were direct and brutal. "I heard about Pinnacle," she said during a family dinner 2 weeks after the contract was canceled. "How unfortunate. Although I suppose when one's business practices are questionable, these things are inevitable." "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, setting down my fork. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," Judith replied with false innocence. "Just rumors about your methods. But you know how people talk in our circles." "What rumors?" "Well, there are whispers about how you secured some of your major contracts. Questions about whether your success is entirely professional." The implication hit me like a physical blow. Judith was spreading the same lies that had cost me the Pinnacle contract, poisoning the waters of New York's business community against me. Ethan, to his credit, immediately defended me. "Mom, that's enough. Harper's success is the result of hard work and talent, nothing else." "Of course, dear. I'm just telling you what people are saying." But the damage was being done systematically. Judith had connections throughout Manhattan's elite social circles, and she was using every one of them to spread doubt about my character and business practices. The attacks weren't limited to my professional life. Judith also began working on my personal relationships, particularly with Grace and Michael, Ethan's younger siblings. Grace was 28, a recent graduate of Columbia Law School who was struggling to find her place in the world. I had taken her under my wing when she was job hunting, introducing her to contacts in the legal field and eventually helping her land a position at a prestigious firm. We'd become close, or so I thought. The change in Grace's attitude toward me was gradual but unmistakable. She became distant, declining invitations to lunch and making excuses to avoid family gatherings when I was present. When I finally confronted her about it, the conversation was devastating. "Grace, have I done something to upset you? You've been avoiding me for weeks." "I just think it's time I focused more on my own family," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "I don't understand. I thought we were family." "You're married to my brother, Harper. That doesn't make us family." The coldness in her voice was shocking. This was the same woman who had called me crying after her first day at the law firm, thanking me for believing in her when no one else would. "Grace, what's really going on here?" "Mom's been talking to me. She's helped me understand some things about loyalty and priorities." "What things?" "Like how a person's true character shows when they have power, and how success can change people in ways they don't even realize." I could hear Judith's words coming out of Grace's mouth, and it made me sick. "Grace, you know me. You know what kind of person I am." "Do I? Because lately, I'm not so sure." Michael was next. Ethan's younger brother was 30, a freelance photographer who had always struggled financially. When he'd been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition 2 years earlier, his medical bills had been overwhelming. I'd quietly paid for his treatments and medications, never expecting anything in return except his recovery. But suddenly, Michael was questioning my motives for helping him. During a family barbecue at the Parkers' Hampton house, he pulled me aside for a conversation that left me reeling. "Harper, I've been thinking about the money you gave me for my medical bills." "What about it?" "I want to pay you back." "Michael, we've discussed this. You don't need to pay me back. You're family." "That's just it. I don't think I should be in debt to you. It feels like you're trying to buy my loyalty." The accusation hit me like a slap. "Michael, how can you say that? I helped you because I care about you, not because I wanted something in return." "Did you? Or did you help me because you wanted to look good to Ethan? Because you wanted to prove you belonged in this family?" Again, I could hear Judith's poison in his words. She was systematically turning the people I cared about against me, reframing my acts of love and generosity as manipulation and calculation. The isolation was deliberate and effective. Judith was cutting me off from my support system within the Parker family, leaving me vulnerable and alone. But the worst betrayal was yet to come. 3 months after the Pinnacle disaster, Ethan began acting strangely. He was working late more often, taking mysterious phone calls that he'd end abruptly when I entered the room, and showing less interest in the physical intimacy that had always been a cornerstone of our relationship. I tried to talk to him about it, but he deflected my concerns with explanations about work stress and family pressures. I wanted to believe him, but something felt fundamentally wrong. The truth came out by accident. I was using Ethan's laptop to check my email when a message notification popped up on his screen. The preview showed enough to make my blood run cold. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. Love, C." My hands were shaking as I opened his email account and scrolled through his recent messages. What I found there destroyed me. Ethan had been having an affair with Chloe Morrison, his college girlfriend. The email thread went back months, filled with passionate declarations of love and detailed plans for secret meetings. But the most devastating messages were the ones where Ethan expressed doubts about our marriage. "I think I married the wrong person," he'd written. "You and I have so much more in common. Harper's success has changed her. She's become someone I don't recognize." And Chloe's response, "Your mother always said I was better suited for you. Maybe it's time you listened to her." The mention of his mother confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't just an affair, it was orchestrated manipulation. Judith had brought Chloe back into Ethan's life deliberately, feeding his doubts about our marriage and encouraging him to reconnect with his first love. I printed out the entire email chain, my tears blurring the pages as I read through months of betrayal. When Ethan came home that evening, I was waiting for him in our living room with the evidence spread out on the coffee table. "How long?" I asked when he walked through the door. He saw the emails and his face went white. "Harper, I can explain." "How long have you been sleeping with Chloe?" 3 months. "But it's not what you think." "It's not what I think. I think you've been having an affair while I'm fighting to save my business and my reputation. I think your mother orchestrated this whole thing to break us up. What part am I wrong about?" Ethan sat down heavily in the chair across from me, his head in his hands. "Mom didn't orchestrate anything. She helped me realize that maybe we want different things from life." "And what is it that we want differently?" "You're so focused on your career, Harper. Everything revolves around your business, your success, your ambitions. I feel like I'm just an accessory to your life." The accusation was so unfair it took my breath away. "An accessory? Ethan, everything I've built for us, for our future together." "But at what cost? You work 16-hour days. You travel constantly. When was the last time we had a real conversation that wasn't about your business? When was the last time you asked me about anything other than business? When was the last time you supported me when things got difficult instead of believing the worst about me?" "I've always supported you." "Have you? Because when the Pinnacle contract was canceled, you didn't ask if I was okay. You didn't offer to help me figure out what went wrong. You just accepted that somehow it was my fault." I didn't know what to say. "You could have said that you believed in me. You could have said that you knew I would never do the things I was being accused of. But you didn't, did you? Because part of you wondered if maybe the accusations were true." Ethan's silence was answer enough. That night, I packed a bag and moved into a hotel. I needed space to think, to process the complete destruction of everything I'd believed about my marriage and my life. While I was staying at the Carlisle, Ryan Mitchell finally called with the news I'd been waiting for. "I found your smoking gun," he said when I met him at his office the next morning. "Your mother-in-law isn't as careful as she thinks she is." He handed me a thick folder filled with bank records, phone logs, and email printouts. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Judith had paid a company called Sterling Communications $250,000 over 6 months. Sterling Communications was owned by Victoria Sterling, a woman who had attended Harvard Business School with Ethan and who now ran a competing marketing firm. "Victoria Sterling," I said, recognizing the name. "She was at Harvard with Ethan." Judith always held her up as an example of the kind of woman Ethan should have married. "It gets better," Ryan said. "We traced the fake emails and manipulated photos back to a digital forensics company that Sterling Communications hired. They're specialists in creating false evidence for corporate espionage. So Victoria Sterling fabricated the evidence that cost me the Pinnacle contract. On your mother-in-law's dime. But there's more." He showed me phone records that proved Judith and Victoria had been in regular contact throughout the campaign against me. He had recordings of conversations, where they discussed strategy and timing. The girl is tougher than I expected. Judith's voice crackled through Ryan's speakers. But everyone has a breaking point. We just need to push harder. The scandal approach is working, Victoria replied. Her clients are starting to question her character. A few more well-placed rumors, and narrative edge will be finished. Good. Once she's gone, you can comfort Ethan through his divorce. He'll see that you're the better choice. And you'll have your son back. Exactly. Win-win. But the most shocking evidence was still to come. Ryan had discovered that Judith's campaign against me had multiple phases. The business sabotage was just the beginning. She's been working on your husband for months, Ryan explained, showing me more phone records. Regular calls to someone named Chloe Morrison. And look at this. He showed me credit card statements that revealed Judith had been paying for an apartment in the Upper West Side. The lease was in Chloe's name. She set up your husband's mistress in an apartment. It gets worse. Look at the dates. She started paying for the apartment 2 months before your husband's affair began. This whole thing was planned. The betrayal was so complete, so systematic, that I felt like I was drowning. Judith hadn't just attacked my business, she'd orchestrated the destruction of my marriage with surgical precision. There's one more thing, Ryan said, his voice gentle. I found evidence that your sister-in-law Grace has been feeding information to your mother-in-law about your business activities. Meeting schedules, client names, strategic plans. The folder he handed me contained email exchanges between Grace and Judith, messages where Grace reported on conversations she'd overheard, meetings she'd observed, confidential information I'd shared with her in confidence. I felt sick. Grace had been my Trojan horse, gathering intelligence for Judith's war against me. I'm sorry, Harper, Ryan said. I know this is a lot to process. It was more than a lot. It was the complete annihilation of everything I'd believed about my life and the people in it. But as I sat in Ryan's office, staring at the evidence of the conspiracy against me, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For months, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I was paranoid or oversensitive. Now I had proof that my instincts had been correct all along. More than that, I had ammunition. The question was how to use it. That evening, I returned to the hotel and began planning my counterattack. Judith Parker had declared war on me, and she'd played her hand brilliantly. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. I spent the next week quietly gathering additional evidence and preparing my strategy. I contacted investigative journalists who specialized in corporate corruption. I reached out to lawyers who handled defamation cases. I compiled a comprehensive dossier of Judith's crimes, complete with financial records, communications, and recorded conversations. But before I went public with the evidence, I decided to give Ethan one last chance to do the right thing. I called him and asked him to meet me for dinner at Daniel, the restaurant where we'd had our first anniversary dinner. It seemed appropriate to end our marriage where we'd once celebrated it. Ethan arrived looking haggard and guilty. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping well. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," I said as we were seated at a quiet corner table. "Harper, about what happened with Chloe. I know about your mother's involvement." His face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I know she paid for Chloe's apartment. I know she orchestrated your reunion. I know about the fake emails and manipulated photos. I know about Victoria Sterling and the $250,000 your mother paid her to sabotage my business." Ethan stared at me in shock. "That's impossible." "Is it? Think about it, Ethan. How convenient that Chloe suddenly reappeared in your life just when I was dealing with a business crisis. How coincidental that you started doubting our marriage just when I needed your support most." "You're being paranoid." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and played one of the recorded conversations between Judith and Victoria. Ethan's face crumpled as he listened to his mother plotting my professional destruction. "She was trying to protect me," he said weakly when the recording ended. "From what? From being married to a successful woman? From having a wife who didn't need your money or your family's approval? She thought you were using me. And what do you think?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched wine glass. "I don't know what to think anymore." "Then let me make it easy for you. Tomorrow morning, I'm holding a press conference. I'm going to reveal everything your mother has done to me, to my business, to our marriage. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable." "Harper, you can't. It would destroy her. She tried to destroy me first, and she succeeded in destroying our marriage. What do you want from me?" "I want you to choose. Support me publicly, denounce what your mother has done, and maybe we can find a way to rebuild what we've lost. Or stay silent and let her face the consequences of her actions alone. She's my mother, and I'm your wife. Or I was, until she convinced you I wasn't worth fighting for." Ethan reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Harper. I am so sorry for everything. For not believing in you, for the affair, for letting my mother poison me against you. Are you sorry enough to do something about it?" "What would you want me to do?" "Stand up to her, publicly. Make it clear that what she did was wrong and that you won't tolerate it." "I can't do that." "Then we're done." I pulled my hand away from his and stood up. "The press conference is tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Plaza. You can choose to be there supporting me, or you can choose to be anywhere else. But choose." The next morning, I stood at the podium in the Plaza's ballroom, looking out at a room packed with reporters, business leaders, and curious onlookers. I was wearing my lucky suit, navy blue Armani that made me feel powerful and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I called this press conference to address a campaign of harassment, sabotage, and defamation that has been waged against me and my company by Judith Parker and Victoria Sterling." I methodically presented the evidence, building my case like the prosecutor I'd once considered becoming. Bank records, email exchanges, recorded conversations, manipulated photographs. The room was dead silent except for the clicking of cameras and the scratching of pens on notepads. Mrs. Parker and Ms. Sterling conspired to destroy my reputation and my business because they believed I wasn't worthy of the success I'd earned or the life I'd built. They used fraud, forgery, and emotional manipulation to achieve their goals. They nearly succeeded. I paused, scanning the room for Ethan's face. He wasn't there. But they underestimated my resolve and my refusal to be anyone's victim. Today, I'm turning over all evidence of their crimes to federal prosecutors. I'm also announcing that Narrative Edge will be pursuing civil litigation for damages related to lost business and defamation. The questions from reporters came fast and furious. I answered each one with documented facts and specific examples. By the time the press conference ended, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Judith Parker and Victoria Sterling were guilty of systematic fraud and harassment. The story exploded across every major news outlet within hours. The New York Times ran a front-page story titled "The Takedown: How Society Matron Orchestrated Corporate Sabotage." The Wall Street Journal focused on the business implications, analyzing how personal vendettas could corrupt professional relationships. Even the tabloids got in on the action, with the New York Post running the headline "Mother in LAW from Hell." But the real impact was felt in the circles where Judith had once held court. Manhattan's elite social scene turned against her with the same vicious efficiency she'd once used against me. Within days, she was quietly removed from the boards of 3 major charities. The Metropolitan Museum revoked her patron status. Her longtime friends stopped returning her calls. Victoria Sterling's downfall was even more spectacular. Sterling Communications lost 6 major clients in the first week after the press conference. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into her business practices. Harvard Business School, where she'd been a major donor and frequent guest lecturer, distanced themselves from her completely. The criminal investigation moved quickly. Federal prosecutors, armed with Ryan's evidence and additional materials subpoenaed from Sterling Communications, filed charges within 2 weeks. Judith was indicted on conspiracy, wire fraud, and defamation charges. Victoria faced additional charges related to corporate espionage and computer fraud. But while I was experiencing professional vindication, my personal life remained in ruins. Ethan's absence from the press conference had spoken volumes about his priorities. When reporters asked about his response to the revelations about his mother, his lawyer issued a brief statement expressing disappointment in the situation, but declining further comment. 3 days after the press conference, Ethan finally called. "Harper, we need to talk." "Do we? Because your silence has been pretty eloquent." "I was processing everything. You have to understand how difficult this is for me. More difficult than it was for me to discover that my husband was having an affair orchestrated by his mother. Can we meet, please?" Against my better judgment, I agreed to see him. We met at our apartment in Tribecar, the space that had once represented our shared dreams and now felt like a mausoleum of our failed marriage. Ethan looked terrible. He'd lost even more weight, and his usually immaculate appearance was disheveled. He'd clearly been drinking. "Harper, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. About what my mother did, about the affair, about how I handled all of it. And I was wrong. About everything. I should have believed you from the beginning. I should have seen what my mother was doing. I should have protected you instead of letting her manipulate me. But you didn't." "No, I didn't. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." I looked at this man who had once been my everything, feeling only a profound sadness. "Ethan, even if I could forgive the affair, even if I could forgive your failure to support me, I can't forgive your silence. When I needed you to stand up and do the right thing, you chose to protect your mother instead of your wife." I was scared. Of what? Of losing my family. Of having to choose between you and everyone I'd known my entire life. You did have to choose. And you chose them. I'm choosing you now. It's too late. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly amicable, considering the circumstances. Ethan didn't contest anything, perhaps motivated by guilt or perhaps by fear that a protracted legal battle would generate more negative publicity for his family. We divided our assets equally, and I kept the apartment in Tribecar while he moved back to his parents' house temporarily. The irony wasn't lost on me that Judith's attempt to break up our marriage had ultimately succeeded, just not in the way she'd planned. Instead of driving me away in shame and defeat, she'd revealed the fundamental weakness in my relationship with her son. Ethan loved me, but not enough to fight for me when it mattered most. Meanwhile, my business was experiencing an unexpected renaissance. The publicity from the scandal had brought Narrative Edge more attention than any advertising campaign could have generated. Potential clients were impressed by how I'd handled the crisis, the professionalism I'd maintained under pressure, and the thoroughness of my investigation into the attacks against me. Within 3 months of the press conference, we'd signed contracts worth over $100 million. I hired 50 new employees and leased an additional floor in our building. Success, as they say, was the best revenge. But success couldn't fill the void left by the destruction of my personal relationships. Grace and Michael had completely cut contact with me after their mother's arrest. Walter Parker, Ethan's father, had sent me a brief note apologizing for his wife's actions, but even he seemed to blame me for bringing shame on the family name. The loneliness was crushing. I threw myself into work, staying at the office until midnight and coming in on weekends. I traveled constantly, visiting clients and scouting new markets. I dated occasionally, but every relationship felt hollow compared to what I'd once had with Ethan. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I was going to move to Hawaii. Narrative Edge had been exploring expansion into the Pacific Rim market, and I'd fallen in love with Maui during a business trip. The island offered something Manhattan never could: a peace. Space to breathe, to heal, to figure out who I was when I wasn't defined by conflict and struggle. I kept a small apartment in New York for business purposes, but I made Maui my primary residence. I bought a house on the North Shore, a sprawling property with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. For the first time in years, I had silence. The healing process was slow and painful. I worked with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, unpacking years of emotional damage and learning to trust my instincts again. I discovered meditation, yoga, and the therapeutic value of long walks on empty beaches. Gradually, I began to rebuild myself from the inside out. I started painting, something I hadn't done since college. I learned to surf, finding unexpected joy in the physical challenge of reading waves and maintaining balance. I made new friends in the tight-knit community of Maui residents, people who knew nothing about my past and cared only about who I was in the present. 2 years after moving to Hawaii, I met David Kim at a charity event for ocean conservation. David was a marine biologist who had relocated from Stanford to study coral reef restoration. He was intelligent, kind, and completely unimpressed by my business success. What attracted him to me was my passion for protecting the environment and my willingness to fund research projects that might not show immediate returns. Our relationship developed slowly, built on friendship and shared values rather than passion and intensity. David had his own history of betrayal, an ex-wife who had left him for his research partner, taking their young daughter to the East Coast. He understood the importance of trust and the difficulty of rebuilding it. We were together for 6 months before he even kissed me, and another year before we moved in together. It was the healthiest relationship I'd ever had, based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than chemistry and drama. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Judith and Victoria had reached their conclusion. Victoria Sterling was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $25 million in restitution to the companies she'd defrauded. Her business was liquidated to pay the fines. Judith's punishment was less severe legally, but more devastating personally. She received 2 years of probation and community service, but the real penalty was social exile. She'd lost her position in New York society, her marriage, and her relationship with her children. Grace and Michael, horrified by the full extent of their mother's crimes, had cut contact with her completely. Walter had filed for divorce and remarried a year later, choosing a kind widow from his golf club who had no interest in social climbing or manipulation. Ethan had moved to London, taking a position with an international finance firm and starting fresh in a city where the Parker name carried no weight. I felt no satisfaction in their various downfalls. The destruction of the Parker family had been necessary to protect myself, but it brought me no joy. I'd simply wanted to be left alone to build my life in peace. That peace was finally threatened when, 3 years after moving to Hawaii, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports, when my housekeeper knocked on the door. "Ms. Evans, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's family." My heart sank when I saw Grace Parker standing in my living room. She'd lost weight and gained lines around her eyes, but she was still recognizably the young woman I'd once considered a sister. "Hello, Harper." "Grace. This is unexpected. I know I have no right to be here. I know you probably never want to see any of us again." "Then why are you here?" "Because I owe you an apology. A real one. Not just the public statement my lawyers made me give after Mom's arrest." I gestured for her to sit down, though I remained standing. "I'm listening. I was weak and stupid and jealous, and I let Mom manipulate me into betraying you. She convinced me that you were using our family, that you were only with Ethan for his money and connections." "Why did you believe her?" "Because it was easier than admitting that I was jealous of your success. You had everything I wanted: a thriving career, independence, the respect of everyone you met. I was 28 years old, living in my parents' house, working at a job you'd gotten for me. I felt pathetic next to you. So you decided to help destroy me." I didn't think of it that way at the time. Mom framed it as protecting the family, looking out for Ethan's best interests. She said you were ambitious and calculating, that you'd eventually hurt him. And you chose to believe her instead of trusting your own judgment about my character. "Yes, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Grace's apology was genuine, but it came 3 years too late. The damage had been done, the trust broken beyond repair. "I appreciate you coming here to apologize," I said finally. "But it doesn't change anything. What your family did to me was systematic and cruel. You all chose to believe the worst about me instead of giving me the benefit of the doubt." "I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong we were." "What happened to your mother?" "She's living in a studio apartment in Queens. Dad cut off all financial support, and she lost most of her assets paying legal fees. She's bitter and angry and refuses to take responsibility for anything she did." "And Ethan?" "Still in London. He's engaged to someone he met there, a banker from a good family." Mom's thrilled, of course. The news hit me harder than I'd expected. Despite everything that had happened, some part of me had apparently been holding onto the hope that Ethan would find a way to redeem himself. "I should go," Grace said, standing up. "I just wanted you to know that some of us learned from what happened. Michael did too. He's in therapy, working through his issues with family loyalty and manipulation." After Grace left, I sat on my terrace overlooking the ocean, processing the unexpected visit and the emotions it had stirred up. I'd thought I was completely over the Parker family and their betrayals, but seeing Grace had reminded me of how much I'd lost when that world imploded. That evening, David found me still sitting on the terrace, staring at the sunset. "Rough day?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. I told him about Grace's visit and the news about Ethan's engagement. David listened without judgment, the way he always did. "How do you feel about it?" he asked when I finished. "Sad, I think. Not because I want him back, but because it confirms that he never really understood what he lost. He's repeating the same pattern, finding another woman who'll fit into his family's expectations instead of learning to stand up for what he wants." "Do you think you would have taken him back if he'd fought for you?" It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past 3 years. Honestly, I don't know. The betrayal went so deep, and it revealed fundamental differences in our values. But I would have respected him more if he'd tried. Well, for what it's worth, I'm grateful he didn't. If he'd been the man you deserved, you never would have ended up here with me. David was right. The destruction of my marriage had been devastating, but it had also freed me to become someone I never could have been as Ethan Parker's wife. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, to value my independence, to build a life based on my own choices rather than someone else's expectations. 6 months later, David proposed to me on the beach where we'd had our first real conversation about coral restoration. The ring was a simple band of recycled platinum with a small, ethically sourced diamond. It was nothing like the massive solitaire Ethan had given me, and that was perfect. Our wedding was small and private, attended by 30 people who truly cared about our happiness. My parents flew in from Ohio, delighted to see me settled and peaceful. David's daughter, now 16 and living with us part-time, served as our ring bearer. The ceremony was performed by a local judge on the beach at sunset, with the sound of waves providing our wedding music. As I exchanged vows with David, promising to love and support him through whatever challenges life might bring, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the public humiliation, all of it had been necessary to strip away the illusions and show me who I really was. I'd learned that love without respect is worthless. That family doesn't mean you have to accept abuse. That sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything to save yourself. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was strong enough to fight for my own happiness. 2 years after our wedding, David and I welcomed our first child together, a daughter we named Luna. As I held her in my arms for the first time, looking into her perfect face, I thought about the future we were building. A future based on honesty, mutual respect, and the hard-won knowledge that we were partners in every sense of the word. Luna would grow up knowing she was wanted, loved, and valued for exactly who she was. She would never have to prove her worth or earn her place in the family. She would be cherished simply for existing. That night, as I sat in our nursery feeding Luna while David slept peacefully in our bed, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The storm had passed. The battle was won. And the future stretched ahead of us, bright with possibility. I'd paid the price for happiness, and it had been worth every penny.